Did you know some of the world's most famous figures secretly changed their religion and their lives were never the same again? Names you never expected, stories you were never told. Fame, fortune, the world at their feet, and then they walked away from it all. Not because they lost, but because they found something. Something they couldn't explain to the world, but couldn't live without. This is not a story about religion. This is a story about the moment a human being looks in the mirror and decides to become someone they've never been before. These are the stories they tried to forget, the ones the world misunderstood, the ones that cost them everything and gave them back themselves. We are all, in some way, born into something. A name, a country, a religion. We didn't choose it, we inherited it. Like eye color, like an accent, like the fear of our parents. But what happens when the faith handed to you no longer fits who you're becoming? What happens when a person, mid-fame, mid-career, mid-life, looks at everything they built and asks, is this real? Am I real? Conversion is rarely a sudden decision. It's the end of a long internal war, a war most people never speak about, because to admit you're searching is to admit you were lost. And when you're famous, when millions of people believe they already know who you are, the cost of that search becomes unimaginable. Imagine you are 28 years old. You have sold millions of records. Your songs are playing in every home, every cafe, every car on the road. You are Cat Stevens, and the world is yours. Born Stephen Dimitri Georgiou in London, 1948, to a Greek father and Swedish mother, his childhood was a collision of cultures, none of them his own. The church was there, the music was there, but the answers were not. In 1969, Cat Stevens nearly died.
Is dropping.
BP is falling. We need to stabilize him now.
Vitals are crashing. Administering epi.
Tuberculosis. He was rushed to hospital, given months to recover in silence, and in that silence, something cracked open. He began to ask questions that fame had drowned out. Who am I? What is this life for? Is there something, someone, beyond all of this? He explored everything: Buddhism, numerology, astrology. He read ancient texts. He meditated. He was, in the truest sense, a spiritual refugee, searching for a home he'd never known. In 1975, his brother David gave him a gift, a copy of the Quran, brought back from Jerusalem. He read it, and he kept reading, not as an academic, not as a curious observer, but as a man who had been wandering in the dark and had just found a door. 2 years later, in 1977, Cat Stevens formally accepted Islam. He took the name Yusuf Islam, and then he did something that still shocks people to this day. He walked away from music entirely. No farewell concert, no final album. He sold his guitars, stepped off the stage, and simply disappeared. The backlash was immediate. The music world was baffled. His fans felt betrayed. The press was merciless, calling him brainwashed, extremist, lost. Record labels lost millions, managers lost clients, and Cat Stevens, he lost the identity the whole world had built for him. In 1989, when he made a comment, widely misquoted and misunderstood, about Salman Rushdie's controversial novel, the world turned on him completely. He was banned in the United States. His music was pulled from radio stations. He became, overnight, one of the most misrepresented public figures of his generation. But ask Yusuf Islam himself, and he will tell you, he gained everything. He built schools. He raised a family rooted in values he believed in. He found community, real human community, not the hollow admiration of crowds who loved his music but didn't know his name. And in 2006, after nearly 30 years of silence, he returned to music, but this time on his own terms, with his own voice, singing not for fame, but for something he finally understood. Some people said he wasted his talent. Others say he finally found what his talent was for.
I've been waiting for this moment all my life, to sing my heart out under these lights. And the music plays on through the night. I don't feel wrong, I'll be out.
He was born Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr. in Louisville, Kentucky in 1942, into a Baptist family, into a segregated America, into a world that had already decided what a black man could and couldn't be. But Cassius Clay refused to accept other people's definitions of himself, of his country, of his God. Even before he became famous, Clay was restless. He saw the inequality around him, the signs, the separate water fountains, the limits placed on his people, and felt a burning question forming in his chest. Whose side is God on? He found an answer, or the beginning of one, in the Nation of Islam. He began attending meetings, listening to Malcolm X speak, and something in those words struck a chord so deep that it changed the architecture of who he was. The morning after the greatest win of his life, he stepped in front of the cameras and made an announcement that stunned the world. He was no longer Cassius Clay. He was Muhammad Ali.
I am ready for any challenger. I will face them all and I will win. I am the greatest. I am Muhammad Ali, and I am here to tell you, I am the greatest.
A member of the Nation of Islam. The boxing world was furious. The press was vicious. The public felt blindsided. Who was this man, and what had he done with the all-American hero they thought they knew? But nothing prepared the world for what came next. In 1966, Ali was drafted to fight in the Vietnam War, and he refused. His reason was not cowardice, it was conscience. He told the press with unflinching clarity, "I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong. No Viet Cong ever called me nigger." He was stripped of his heavyweight title, his boxing license was revoked, he was convicted of draft evasion and sentenced to 5 years in prison, a sentence he never served but that hung over him for years. At 27 years old, at the peak of his physical power, Muhammad Ali was banned from doing the only thing he'd ever known. He lost 3.5 years of his prime, years in a boxer's career that can never be replaced. He lost millions in earnings. He lost the title he'd bled for. He lost the approval of a country he loved, but that had never fully loved him back. But across college campuses, across civil rights marches, across the world, something else was happening. Ali was becoming more than a boxer. He was becoming a symbol. He came back. He fought again. He won back the title, not once, but twice more. He became, perhaps, the most recognized human being on the planet. And when he died in 2016, the outpouring of grief was global. Presidents wept, nations mourned. But here is what matters most. Ali himself, in his final years, was asked if he had any regrets. He smiled and said no. If Muhammad Ali's story is about refusing, then Malcolm X's story is about becoming. Born Malcolm Little in Omaha, Nebraska in 1925, his early life was defined by violence and loss. His father was killed, likely by white supremacists, when he was 6. His mother was institutionalized. He was passed between foster homes. By his 20s, he was in prison for burglary, and it was there, in the one place society sends people to be forgotten, that Malcolm X was born. His siblings introduced him to the teachings of Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam. In a cell, with nothing but time and books, Malcolm taught himself to read, and then he read everything. The Nation of Islam gave Malcolm what the world had taken from him: identity, dignity, purpose, and a framework to understand the rage he'd been carrying his whole life. He became Minister Malcolm X, and he was electrifying, sharp, furious, brilliant. He said what no one else would say, the way no one else would say it. He frightened the comfortable and galvanized the oppressed. But here is where Malcolm X's story becomes something else entirely, something rarer. In 1964, after a painful falling out with Elijah Muhammad, a man he had loved like a father, Malcolm X made a decision that changed not just his life, but his entire worldview. He went on Hajj, the Islamic pilgrimage to Mecca, and what he saw there destroyed every assumption he had carried with him. White men, black men, brown men, red men, all dressed the same, all bowing together, all equal in the eyes of God. He wrote home to his followers, "America needs to understand Islam because this is the one religion that erases from its society the race problem." He came back a different man. He took a new name, El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, and then he began speaking not of black separatism, but of universal human brotherhood. This evolution terrified people on all sides. The Nation of Islam saw it as a betrayal. The FBI, which had been monitoring him for years, intensified its surveillance. Death threats arrived daily. On February 21, 1965, barely a year after his pilgrimage, Malcolm X was assassinated at the Audubon Ballroom in New York City. He was 39 years old. He never got to finish the sentence he was becoming, but the sentence itself, the arc of a man willing to evolve, even at mortal risk, has never stopped speaking. His autobiography became one of the most important books of the 20th century. His ideas live in the speeches of activists, the lines of poets, the quiet resolve of anyone who has ever chosen growth over comfort.
Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar.
Malcolm X converted twice, and both times he became more fully himself. In 2004, Dave Chappelle was the hottest comedian in the world. Chappelle's show was a cultural phenomenon. He had just signed a $50 million deal, one of the largest in television history. And then he disappeared. He flew to South Africa, not to run away, though that's how the world told the story, but to breathe, to think, to hear himself think, maybe for the first time in years. Chappelle grew up in a home shaped by African-American cultural identity and intellectual tradition. He had been exposed to Islam through his father and the community he moved through, but for years it existed at the edges of his life rather than the center. Hollywood, for all its opportunity, had a cost. The pressure to perform, the expectation to be outrageous, transgressive, endlessly provocative. The feeling, which he later described with raw honesty, that some of the laughter wasn't with him, but at the pain beneath the joke. He had been formally introduced to Islam years earlier, and while the exact timeline of his personal faith journey remained private, which is itself significant, he eventually confirmed that Islam had become a genuine living part of who he was. But unlike the others in this story, Chappelle didn't make a press conference announcement. He didn't write a letter to the world. He simply stopped performing the version of himself that was making other people rich. And in the space that opened up, he found something. Peace, by his own account. A framework for living that didn't require an audience. $50 million. Overnight. The opportunity of a generation by the industry's measure. He was called crazy, unstable, ungrateful. His choices were psychoanalyzed by people who had never met him. And for a while, Hollywood acted like he was finished. He came back, but on his terms. His later specials showed a comedian who had stopped trying to please everyone and started saying exactly what he meant. Whether you agree with his views or not, and millions don't, there is something undeniable in his presence now. A man who chose himself over the machine, who found in faith not a cage, but a compass. Dave Chappelle's story is perhaps the quietest of the four, and maybe that's exactly the point. 4 people, 4 lives, 4 radical acts of faith. A musician who walked away from stages, a boxer who refused a war, a man who changed his mind and paid with his life, a comedian who chose silence over $50 million. What does it mean? Did religion change their destiny or reveal it? Here is a question worth sitting with. Did faith transform these men, or did it simply illuminate who they always were going to be? Cat Stevens was always searching for something beyond applause. Muhammad Ali was always a man who would not be told what to stand for. Malcolm X was always evolving, always the most dangerous kind of thinker, the kind who changes their own mind. And Dave Chappelle was always, at his core, someone who needed to be seen as a human being, not a product. Perhaps religion did not change them. Perhaps it was the mirror they'd been waiting for, the one that finally showed them the face they recognized. We talk about religion as if it is something passed down, like a piece of furniture, a family recipe, a surname. And often it is. Most people practice the faith of their parents in the country of their birth without ever questioning why. But what these 4 men suggest is something more complicated, that the faith that shapes you most profoundly may not be the one you're born into, but the one you choose, the one that costs you something, the one that requires you to walk into the unknown and say, I believe in this enough to lose everything else. Is conversion an act of rebellion or courage? The world often frames conversion as a betrayal, a rejection of heritage, family, community, and sometimes it is all of those things. But consider this. What is it to wake up in a life you didn't entirely choose and say, I want something more true? Is that not in the deepest sense a form of courage? These men were not weak. They were not lost. They were, perhaps, among the most courageous human beings of their time, because they chose the harder path, the one with no guarantee, no applause, no safety net, the path that only makes sense from the inside. And yet, we cannot romanticize this. The psychological cost of changing belief systems is real and profound. To convert is to grieve, to lose the version of yourself that the world knew, to rebuild an identity from the inside out while the outside world refuses to let go of who you used to be. Cat Stevens was misrepresented for decades. Muhammad Ali was stripped of his livelihood. Malcolm X was killed. Dave Chappelle was called unstable. The world does not make it easy to change, because change, real change, reminds everyone else of how static they've allowed themselves to become.
We live in a world that rewards certainty, that wants you to pick a lane, stay in it, and never look back, that wants your identity to be a brand, consistent, predictable, consumable. These four men refused. They each found in their own way a belief that was bigger than their careers, bigger than their reputations, bigger than the version of themselves the world had constructed and was profiting from. And each of them paid a price, a real, tangible, sometimes devastating price. But here is the question that stays with me long after the research is done, long after the names and dates and headlines fade. If you were in their position, would you have the courage to change everything for what you believe is truth? Not the truth that's popular, not the truth that's comfortable, not the truth that keeps your career intact and your relationships safe. The truth that keeps you awake at night. The truth that sits in your chest and will not be quiet. That kind of truth. These were their stories. What about yours? If this story moved you, if it made you think differently, feel something, or remember why you believe what you believe, we'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Tell us whose story hit you hardest, and is there a figure in history whose transformation you think the world needs to hear about? Every comment you leave, every subscriber who joins this channel, it tells us that these stories matter, that depth matters, that there is still an audience for the kind of storytelling that takes its time. Subscribe to Timeless Voices, because the most important stories aren't the ones that are trending, they're the ones that are true.